All right. Welcome to the Rise Up Podcast. I'm your host, Jonah Mitchell, and on this show, I do my best to help you get out of your own way, rise up to your potential, and create the lifestyle, create the results that you want that actually fit to your lifestyle so you can sustain them. And really, I hope to make this a lot easier than we tend to make it. We can get in our own way very easily, and I want to shed some light on how and why that is so that ultimately you can start catching it and learning to make a little bit different or more ideal decisions for your goals. So, and that's what today's episode is going to be all about. I appreciate you stopping by and listening. And this is something I talk about a lot, but I wanted to really be specific on today's topic. And this is going to be going over emotional eating, right? How to stop eating your emotions, returning to food when certain things in your life end up happening. This is very, very challenging for a lot of us who want to lose weight, who want to see body composition improvements. And the way to do that is to be in a calorie deficit. But when we go through tough times and our coping mechanism is food, or not even coping mechanism, or we're going through happy times and we enjoy food when we're happy, when we're sad, when we're whatever. If we associate food with all those things, it can be very challenging for us to find that middle ground where we can actually see results and not feel like we're always getting in our own way and self-sabotaging. And today, I really want you to, if you don't already, but I don't expect you to, but I think today is I would want you to write some notes down, or at least just keep this in the back of your mind. Because if you're someone who does struggle with eating their emotions or using food for any celebration whatsoever, and it's affecting your consistency, and then kind of going down the rabbit hole of not feeling good enough, or feeling like you messed up, or like you failed, I really want you to I want you to listen to this multiple times. I also want you to give yourself some notes so that you can start paying attention to how and why this happens so that you can catch it, right? And that's where I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. But essentially, I want to give you a background, give you an understanding of why this happens, why just because we know better, we don't always do better. So anything that we do, any choice, any behavior that we exhibit, there are three parts to it. Three parts to the behavior, all right? Now, the first part to the behavior is some sort of trigger. I want you to think of your brain as a master computer that is always assuming how things are going to go, assuming how things are going to play out, and the computer is set to press play on certain files of your behaviors of your behaviors based off the information it's receiving, based off the stimulus it has in its life. So and then it takes all this information and it categorizes them and puts a lot of similar situations in the same categories, but we may not be aware of it. It may look different in different scenarios, but it always has the same characteristics. So our brain pulls out that file, presses play on the file, and that's what leads to the second part of the behavior, which is the action. Right, the trigger starts playing, and that the action starts is what we do, is the behavior that we end up deciding to roll with. So for example, something that I struggle with and still work on to this day is when I'm stressed or emotional, sweets really, really helps me feel better. So if I get stressed out, my that's my trigger. My action is to go grab candy, preferably Reese's, and that helps me. That's what leads to the third part of the behavior, which is the reward. And like I already said, to feel better. Usually, that reward is always going to be to feel better, to enjoy the moment, or whatever, or something along those lines. Like if it's a negative association, it's usually to feel better. If it's a positive association, it's usually to feel present, or to just enjoy yourself. Right? There's always a reward for the behavior, and so our goal here is to understand these three phases of a decision and decide which one or which part of it is the most effective thing to address in order for us to lead to change. Now, if you listen to my show before, I talk about a part of us that's more like a kind of a survival way of thinking. We don't really think about the action; we just do. This could be like you're stressed, so you turn to food, or you're overwhelmed, so you don't do anything like that. That reactive decision that's like, it's so hard, I don't want to think about it. I just want convenient, or whatever that is. That survival part of us, that's not really us. That's like that we make a decision and we don't think about it, so we feel very bad. And then the part of us that does feel bad is the real version of us that we want to be, the person that we know we let down when we say yes to those decisions and we listen to them, and they don't actually help us feel any better. So how it's the similar philosophy of understanding that side of us, that part of us that makes irrational decisions based off of the environment. But that's why I wanted to help you start to conceptualize this. So now that you have that baseline of, okay, there's certain situations that you may not be yourself, right? But this is the mechanism of making decisions so that you can ultimately identify that person that you've been in these emotional states and catch it and challenge it in a way that will allow you to make a more aligned decision, right? This is not about, it's not about being good, it's not about being bad, it's about understanding how to make an aligned decision. And usually when we're triggered to turn towards food, it's usually not an aligned decision. It's usually going to end up being a misaligned decision that's going to cause a lot more stress and defeat the purpose of the reward, right? That's another thing I want you to understand is like our mind wants to feel better, or it wants to get a certain reward. And usually the action we may feel that temporary relief in the moment, but afterwards, when we feel and we start thinking about it and we feel bad about it, we didn't solve the problem. We didn't actually get the reward that we wanted, and we actually created more problems, more stress. And guess what? The vicious cycle starts. This trigger happens again, the action happens again, we get the temporary reward, but leads to the never-ending cycle, where we can stop the cycle by understanding the reward in itself. And that's the first step. After you understand the three parts of the behavior, okay, now it's time to understand and identify the reward. So we're going to go back to stress eating, right? If we turn to food, like if we break it down, we turn to food because food helps us feel better. And we think about it, does food actually feel better? Yes, in the moment, we get temporary relief because our bodies are like feeling stress, and chewing and eating food actually gives us a stress relieving response. However, if after we're done, we feel worse because we did something that we know didn't actually is not going to help us in the long run, it's only going to hurt us in the short term and the long term, we're actually not getting the reward that we hope. We may not be aware of it, but we just need to identify, what do we want to feel? How do we want to feel? Do we want to feel better? Great. That is the goal. I want to feel better. There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better. But we need to understand that that's what we're trying to accomplish when we're turning to food. And when we do turn to food, we don't actually feel good about it afterwards. We feel worse. And then that's how we can start perpetuating the cycle that makes us continue to not see the results that we want and ultimately getting in our own way. So after we identify the reward of wanting to feel better, right, then we look at the triggers, right? We're kind of doing this in the moment is challenging, but I want you to think about it out of the moment. So when it does happen, you can catch it. You can realize it. But when we identify, okay, when I turn to food, I'm trying to feel better. I want to stop thinking about the response. Okay, there's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better, but the way that I'm doing it is not ideal. So now we have to identify the trigger. What sends me into this spiral? What starts me down this path of making decisions that don't actually help me? Why do I do this? Why do I end up here? Where can I start noticing these triggers, right? Is it at work? Is it with your spouse? Is it with your family? Is it when you're overwhelmed, right? Any emotional state or any emotional state that's in the same general category, our mind can be triggered, right? Because our brain is a supercomputer that has these massive files and kind of generalizes most scenarios in a similar one. So it could be stress, it could be anxiety, it could be overwhelm, it could be boredom. Like there's so many like possible associations and emotions that can tie into this. And so if we can start identifying these triggers, right, these patterns, right, when we see the pattern, then we can decide what to do about it, right? Because we can't change the reward. We can't change wanting to feel better. There's nothing wrong with wanting to feel better, right? Or whatever, insert any emotional state or any emotional reward or relief that you want for the reason why you turn to food and feel bad about it, right? And we can't eliminate the triggers in our life. We can't get rid of the stress in our life. Like this is one of the toughest things I coach my clients through, who are all or nothing people who want things to go perfectly all the time. We can't do that. It's physically universally impossible to control everything in our life. And that's not I don't want to say that and say, "Oh, you're screwed, you can't do anything." There's still things that you can control, right? And this is like the illusion of control and the illusion of lack of control are both very, very tough mindsets to work through. But we have to realize that we can find a middle ground, and we can control the controllables, and we can't worry about the things that we don't have control over, which is triggers. We can't control the triggers, right? But we can control our decisions. We can control our actions. And the only way we get to that point where we decide to do something different in order to get a reward that's actually going to give us the reward that we want without the cycle of feeling miserable is identifying the trigger first and catching it, saying, I'm going down the same pattern that I usually do. Do I want to do it again? Right? This is the moment right here. This is the challenge most people have. They're usually good at talking to themselves, saying, I can't have it, don't have it, I can't have it, don't have it, I can't have it, don't have it. And there's a funny thing that our brain does when we're talking to ourselves that way. It's the same thing that happens to children when you tell them they can't have something over and over and over again. All they do is think about the thing that they can't have. And unfortunately, even if we're grown adults, we still have very childlike reactions to these things. So if we treat ourselves the way that if we treat that part of us the way that we would treat a child, telling them they can't have it, all we're going to do is think about it to the point where that moment where we can make a different decision, you don't even think about it. You make the same decision. And before you realize it, you're eating the donut, you're eating the cookie. You have no ability to realize it's happening because that moment right before you're having this conversation that's not actually helpful. You're not challenging the way that you're thinking. All you're doing is telling your brain you can't have it. So your brain's trying to rebel. And we're all a little rebellious. We inherently don't like being told what to do. And so when we identify the trigger and we anticipate it's going to happen again, I'm going to go down that cycle again. Now, instead of us saying, don't have it, can't have it, don't have it, can't have it, we're now going to say, do I actually want this? Is it actually going to give me the reward that I want? That right there, just a little bit different question. Now we're not saying you can't or you don't have it. We're giving ourselves time to think. We're giving ourselves some space to say, is this in alignment with my goals? Is this actually going to give me the result, the reward that I want? Or is it going to give me temporary relief that I'm going to feel shitty about, and I'm going to tear myself down, and I'm going to feel even more terrible, and I'm going to keep spiraling, and I'm going to eat my feelings again, and now I am eating over 2,000 calories in this day, and now because I know weight loss and fat loss requires a calorie deficit, I know I'm way out in left field, and I might as well stop trying, right? Let's stop that cycle by asking right here, right now, in that moment, is this going to give me the reward that I want? Right? Is it going to actually make me feel better? And I like to tell when I'm talking to my clients about this. I may have said it on the show before. I've done so many podcasts. I don't know how many times I've said the same thing over and over again. But I usually help my clients like conceptualize this by remembering when they learned how to look both ways before they cross the street. Right? We learned how to think before we act. Because if we don't look both ways when we cross the street, we run the risk of getting hit by a car. What happens when we get hit by a car? We can either die or get seriously injured. And to avoid that, we think before we act. And it's the same philosophy here. We just haven't had the practice. We just haven't had the practice that most people we haven't had the same practice that we did when we were kids playing near the street, and we always had to practice every single time look both ways. Even as adults, we still practice look both ways. We don't practice actually thinking through our decisions when it comes to food, and that's not because we're failures or anything like that. It's just we get so distracted with how busy our life is, and our brain wants to feel better. It doesn't always have the bandwidth to make these decisions. So it's going to put a lot of stuff on autopilot, like emotional eating. So if we can take that moment between the trigger and the action and think towards what do we want to actually accomplish, that is then when we can remind ourselves how else or what else can give us the reward without the guilt, the shame, the frustration, or whatever it is after we're done doing it. So this last part is, What other things in your life help you feel relaxed, help you reduce stress that don't involve food, right? When we break up the decisions into or the this process into these ways, we identify the reward, want to feel better, right? Or whatever it is. We identify the trigger, what causes the pattern. Cool. Now we can start picking or have on hand a list of things that we can do instead of eating so that we ultimately don't feel miserable about our decision. We start practicing a new way of thinking and a new behavior so that we get a reward that's actually going to make us feel better and not cross a line with us that makes us overconsume calories, which would make it hard to see results. This is the process, right? Identify the identifying the triggers and then deciding after you think through, is this actually going to give me the reward that I want? That's why we start with the reward. We have to start with the end in mind, right? Because if we just tell ourselves over and over and over again, we can't have it, right? Don't do it. That's bad. That's bad. That's bad, right? All we're going to be fueling is that part of us that gets very rebellious and says, I'm tired of you telling me what to do. I'm going to have the thing that I can't have, which again, we know better, but we don't always do better because we are making it harder than it needs to be. This is not an easy process. This is hard to quantify. But if this is a big part of your life and you've struggled with seeing the physical results that you want, we have to address this first before I could ever tell you we can expect weight loss. Right? No matter what macro, no matter what template you're handed, you will always find a way to go back into this pattern because you haven't addressed it. And because we can't control the triggers in our life, it's inevitable. It's going to happen, whether you like it or not. So we can be prepared for it by this way, and we can use that to make a more aligned decision, right? And we can think through the behavior. We can look both ways before we cross the street and ask ourselves, is this actually going to give me the reward that I want? Or is this going to cause more stress? Is this going to cause more overwhelm? Is this going to cause more frustration? You know, again, this is going to take time. This is going to take practice. And that's okay. Because here's another thing I want to share with you. If we don't learn how to do these skills, no matter what success you create, if you don't change this relationship with yourself, usually, I don't want to say always, but usually it's a matter of time before we go fall back down the old habits, the old rabbit hole. I see it all the time. In the transformation project, we run a 6-week challenge, and people super excited, super energized at the start of the challenge. They are super ready to go, and everything is sunshine and rainbows, and they love it. And over time, little by little, their life stressors don't stop. The triggers don't stop. And because we've practiced certain behaviors due to certain triggers, eventually our brain is going to say, well, our bandwidth, our motivation, our energy that we were experiencing before is pretty new. We haven't practiced it. We haven't solidified this as the new behavior. So as you're going back to your normal life and your normal routine, I'm going to take more and more motivation and attention away. And I'm going to put you more back on autopilot so that eventually you slip back into old patterns so that we can deal with these other stressors, your job, your spouse, your kids, whatever it is, the distractions that make it harder for us to pay attention to ourselves. And if we don't practice this when the iron is hot, we will fall back into those patterns. It's that cycle perpetuates. And sometimes man, this is so hard. This is so hard for me because I don't want people to experience this. I don't like it when this happens. But it's also valuable when it happens. Because then when I'm telling my clients, eventually you won't let this happen as often. Eventually it's just going to happen less and less and less. And that's progress. But most people see it when it happens as a failure, so that's what starts to spiral. But it's so hard to get people to realize that once like progress is, it just happens less frequently. And to convince yourself that it can still happen and you can still see results is a challenge, especially if we're used to this pattern knocking us off the path and it sends us down those triggers, right? So anyway, I'm going to go down a different rabbit hole, but I'm telling you this because if you can catch it now, and this is something you struggle with, you can start practicing it. You can start paying attention to it. And you can start integrating it into what you're doing and see when it happens, how often it happens, and ultimately remember that it doesn't have to be perfect. We can't eradicate a behavior that we may have struggled with for the vast majority of our life in 6 weeks or a few months, 6 months to a year. Like I've worked with a woman going on a little over a year, and she's in her mid 30s, I believe, and her whole life, for as long as she can remember, she had such an emotional relationship with her food and herself, especially. And for a year, we've been working on that relationship. Now, I'm not saying that's anything wrong with her, right? And I'm not saying that this will always happen, but actually, it didn't even take us a year. It took us probably about 7 or 8 months to finally remove the emotion from this process so she can look at it without judging herself, to identify her triggers and understand that it's not a bad thing to feel better, but the decisions, her actions weren't actually ideal. So when we got to the point where she was deciding to make more aligned decisions, it only took us about 7 months, right? It could be shorter, it could be longer, but now we're in this process where we're understanding the information and we're setting her up for successful weight loss without all the BS, all the emotional stuff. It's not judgment, it's understanding. And that makes it a lot easier for me to ask her to adjust her calories without making her feel like she's super restricted, because she knows the decisions that are going to help her feel better. And she's less likely, not impervious, but less likely to fall back to old patterns, because she likes when she feels empowered. She likes when she makes decisions for herself, and because she's not tearing herself down as much. She's not feeling guilty or ashamed as often. This is so important. And if we didn't do this, no matter how much weight I would help her lose, she could fall back into this pattern. This is why I'm telling you this story. This is what I primarily teach people. I love teaching this stuff because I want to empower you to make your own decisions and not just make irrational, emotional decisions that don't actually help you feel better. Yes, you feel better in the moment. You temporarily feel relief, because that is what eating does for us. It gives us a temporary moment of relief. And that's what we crave when we're stressed or emotional. We want relief. But if it causes more harm in the long run, short-term solution that leads to long-term problems, it's ultimately going to get worse. It's going to make our life a lot harder, especially when it comes to losing weight and especially keeping it off. So I went out on this rant, and I didn't expect this to be as long as it is, but I want you. I actually, you know what? I was listening to a video from Tony Robbins. Tony Robbins is one of my biggest idols. Like, he's basically changed my entire life and has made me the reason why I wanted to be a coach. And he says something in the video I was watching. He's like, I want you to get what you want. I want you to have the success that you want. The only way to get that is to get out of your own way. And this is how you do it. This is the tactics to do it. And you have to do it for as long as is needed, right? If you struggled 3-4 decades, it's not going to take 3 or 4 decades to fix it. I promise you that. It may take longer than you would like it to be or like it to, but I promise, if you dedicate your time, it'll happen. It'll happen a lot quicker than you can believe. And I stole that line from Coach Mike Milner, who has an awesome podcast. I would recommend. I think it's Mind Over Macros. It's a great podcast. So just in summary, to finish this all up here, if you want to make a decision, if you want to lose weight and sustain it, and you want to get out of your own way, you want to stop using food for your emotions, you first must identify, what does the food give you? What's the reward the food gives you when you're eating it? After you identify the reward, what do you want, right? To feel better. Cool. We'll just keep it there. Then we identify what triggers that. What emotion triggers that? Is it stress? Is it frustration? Is it overwhelm? Is it anxiety? Right? Is it anger? Is it sadness? Is it happiness? What triggers that? Right? Then, after we identify the trigger, we then identify all the other things that can give us the reward without the food, right? But the most important part is right between that identifying the trigger and right before the behavior, the action happens. You ask yourself, is the food going to help me feel better? Look both ways before you cross the street. When you do that, and you have that list of other activities, other things that you can do to help you feel better, you're gonna feel empowered. You're going to feel better, and you're not going to sabotage your results unwillingly anymore. You're going to make a decision that actually leads to the success of your health and weight loss journey, and more importantly, the sustainability of it. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope you found this helpful. And if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to reach out to me on any of my social media. It's listed down below. And if you did find this helpful, please share this with at least one person. It helps me a lot. I love getting a chance to work with people, or even not even work with people. Just I love the opportunity to help you, even in a small way. So even if I never speak to you, but I'm able to help you move forward at least in one direction, it means the world to me. And even if you don't agree with me, if you think I'm full of crap, still share it. I don't want to argue with people on the internet, but I do want to help. And the more I get to help, I don't know. I'm done. Yeah, I like helping. All right, I'm done ranting. Got emotional now. The emotion's coming down, and I'm ready to end this podcast. So thank you so much for taking the time to be with me today. I hope you found it helpful. And like I said, if you did, please don't hesitate to share, or please share it with someone, at least one person. It helps me out a lot. And if you need anything, don't hesitate to reach out to me via email, social media, whatever. I'm always happy to help. So done ranting at you. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day or night, wherever you listen to, and I'll see you on the next one.